Oh boy, folks, we're getting close. This week, we're taking a look at the penultimate issue before the well-known shake-up storyline Endgame. And it looks like this one's going to be pretty heavy, as we have Sonic and Jeffrey literally at each other's throats on the cover, and I just love this one. I mean, I still hate Jeffrey as a character, but this sort of confrontation was kind of what his inclusion was supposed to build to in general. And the expressions on the cover just sell it. It's an excellent reaction image. We open on a flashback of Chuck explaining what happened when he first used the roboticizer, originally intended as a medical tool to save the lives of those terminally sick or injured. But when he used it on his brother Jules, Sonic's father, as a test subject after injuries he suffered during the Great War, it worked too well, transforming Jules into a mindless robotic slave. We cut back to the present, where Uncle Chuck is apparently projecting all of this onto a wall using his eyes. He's installed a bunch of recording equipment straight into his body, allowing him to record and store anything he sees, and play them back. He goes on to explain that his spy network picked up some secret video files, proving that Robotnik tampered with the machine to get the outcome that he wanted, and that his tampering would cause Chuck to feel such extreme guilt that he would resign as the scientific advisor to the king. Probably didn't know he'd open up a chili dog stand, though. Chuck's been having a lot of doubts lately about whether or not they can actually de-roboticize everyone, and points out a few times where he failed to provide information that would have helped them, such as not realizing Sleuth was a traitor until it was almost too late, or that he was unable to find evidence of the Death Egg's existence until it was up and operational. Everyone else tries their best to reassure him on all fronts that he's doing the best that could be expected of someone in his position. But then they have some company. It turns out to be the Wolfpack Freedom Fighters, and if you're wondering where they came from, well, this is actually their first introduction in the comic. If you weren't a fan of the Saturday morning show, you wouldn't have any idea who these characters are, but the comic picks up basically assuming that you saw the episode Cry of the Wolf, where they were introduced, and not even really bothering with a proper introduction beyond that. They all gather around the campfire and get each other up to speed on each group's intel, with one of the wolf pack, a white wolf named Drago, stating that Robotnik has a new line of superbots that will be put into production soon, but then when Tails points out that he seems a bit on edge and isn't eating, he points out that when they're going to be attacking a den of robots, there's one among their number. Sonic, of course, is quick to defend his uncle, saying that he's not a spy for Robotnik, but then, oh boy, look who shows up to make matters that much worse, mocking them for making an easily visible campfire in the middle of the woods before macking on Sally. Again. And then things decide to go really topsy-turvy when he reveals that he's been spying on Chuck for a good long while, and discovered that the roboticizer tape was actually delivered by Sleuth. Both Chuck and Sally point out that 1, it was weeks before Chuck knew he was a traitor, and 2, that doesn't mean that the tape isn't authentic. But Jeffrey sticks to his guns, stating that there's no way Chuck isn't working for Robotnik. Sonic sucker punches him right in the face, thank you for that, but Jeffrey gets the drop on him with a bola, tying him to a tree, and then outright threatens to kill Sonic. However, salvation comes from an unlikely place, as Antoine, of all characters, comes forward and decks him hard enough to lay him out, before accusing Jeffrey of being the spy, and he's rapidly becoming one of my favorite characters after this. He explains that a general to the king, his father as it turns out, helped to establish the idea of the rebel underground. However, he was one of the first high-profile casualties during the coup, and yet Jeffrey shows up years later claiming to be the leader of the organization that Antoine's father established. Jeffrey attempts to defend himself, but Antoine's not having it, attacking him again. Sally has to break them up, stating that they'll sort this out once everyone is calmed down. Princess, with all due respect, when someone aims a crossbow bolt at one of your dearest friends and accuses an established spy of being a double agent, it's kind of time to reevaluate him as a potential ally. And then we get a bit of an out-of-nowhere scene where we suddenly delve deeper into Antoine's backstory, where it's revealed that he saved Bunny early in the war from being captured, well, before she was half roboticized anyway. It's basically a retcon stating that one of the reasons he was such a butt monkey up to now was because he craved attention and later love, but unable to get it from his absent father, or from Sally, he sort of lost his way. It's rather trite, especially since it causes a few problems with continuity as to how well Bunny knew him before she met everyone else, but at least we do get a sweet scene of her comforting him, letting him know that she does care. Meanwhile, back with the plot, Lupe and the rest of the wolves confront Drago after he went for a walk. It's apparently the third time he's left without permission, and Lupe states that she'll be keeping a closer eye on him, while everyone else reiterates their own suspicions on one another. Sally finally steps in and orders them all to quit throwing around accusations that are unsubstantiated, since everyone around here has proven their loyalty time and time again. Yes, even Jeffrey, loath as I am to admit it, but that still doesn't excuse the crossbow bolt to the head. I'm still keeping my eye on you, you son of a... Of course, she immediately follows this up by shooting any sort of hope of natural reconciliation between her friends in the foot by basically saying their only hope is if Knuckles finishes his quest. I'm of two minds with this story. From one point of view, it's an excellent story about the pot boiling over, so to speak, with several smaller plot threads coming to a head just before a massive event that could potentially have consequences in the coming issues. On the other hand, there wasn't really a proper build-up to these events. Yes, the threads were always there, but it feels like there was a bit of a leap somewhere for some of these characters. Jeffrey and Sonic hate each other, yes, but I never got the impression that the two of them questioned whose side that they were on, after their initial confrontation, for example. It's mostly a consequence of the selective continuity of the series up to this point, unfortunately. The threads were introduced and got tangled, so it was impossible to follow them to what should be a logical conclusion here in this story, where everyone seems like they're at the breaking point. That's to say nothing about how uneven the characterization in the story is, with a lot of exposition and character details just being dumped into our laps at once. Chuck's backstory with the roboticizer, for example, certainly justifies his rather depressing outlook on the situation, but with no build-up and no hinting at it beforehand, his sudden tonal shift from competent go-getting spy leader to depressed worrywart seems totally out of nowhere. And apart from the sweet moment with Bunny at the end, the segment focusing on Antoine was basically an entire rewrite of his character for the sake of making him a little bit less of a buffoon, rather than having him naturally grow out of that role as the series progresses, essentially excusing all of his cartoonish antics as him not being right in the head, as it were. And then there's the introduction of the Wolf Pack, whose entire appearance in this comic is so low-key that it hardly matters. Again, if you didn't watch the cartoon, then their introduction comes right out of nowhere, and the introduction of Drago, a comic-only character who will play a role in the endgame story arc, only muddies the water further. Bottom line, this should be a tense boiling point for the series, especially for what's coming next, but it just feels very half-baked due to a lack of proper setup and literally everything being dumped on the reader all at once. Penders' usual writing style of using characters less as characters and more like expositional mouthpieces and having them talk way too much comes back in full force here, and it makes the issue a bit of a slog to read, despite all of the accusations being thrown around. Artwork this time was handled by Nelson Ortigo and Brian Thomas on pencils and inks respectively, and it's very inconsistent. Sometimes characters look fine, even given some incredible detail that only enhances their design. Other times they look rushed and sloppy, and it's especially off-putting when it's both on and off model in the same panel, with some of the characters looking natural and others looking stiff or stilted. And then there are just some weird posing decisions with the comic as well. I will say though, Barry Grossman, our usual colorist, hits it out of the park this time, especially when it comes to shadow and lighting. The colors look fantastic throughout the issue, but he really takes advantage of the campfire. This panel in particular, making Drago look particularly demonic, is one of my favorites in the entire issue. But we're still only about halfway done, folks. We still have the Knuckles backup story to take a look at, the finale of his quest, as a matter of fact. We open on Knuckles dropping into the lair of the alchemist, Matthias Poe, who is a raven. Get it? And Damocles the Elder. He assumes they'll be hostile, so he tries to go in for a sneak attack, but he loses his grip on the stone wall. Poe's immediate response is to bring a big metal golem to life and have it attack Knuckles. Knuckles tries to fight the thing off, but it's too solid for his punches. Thankfully, as he's getting chased around, Archimedes, who hitched a ride in his pack, tells him that the only way a golem can continue to move is if it's given a constant flow of magical energy to stay animated. So he uses his patented disappearing and fire-breathing trick to take out Poe, which also causes the golem to shut down. After giving it a good smash, Knuckles examines the strangely immobile wizard, only to discover that it's little more than a dummy, probably used by Po as a magical focal point. Knuckles is of course frustrated, but all of the spilled potions on the table suddenly cause the dummy to start melting, or rather transforming. Yes, as it turns out, Po had the Sword of Acorns and had disguised it to use it as a magical focus talisman. So now Knuckles finally has the sword, but he finds that it won't take him to the Hall of Limbo where the crown is kept. Still, he's kept his promise and retrieved the sword. Well, this is certainly an ending. While the quest storyline started off with a lot of promise and potential, it sort of ran out of steam by the time we got to part 2. Since it was relegated to the backup stories, the plot had to be moved at a breakneck pace, and all of these characters we were meeting weren't really characters, they were more like obstacles. Despite the build-up they were given, none of them really had any defining trait beyond their designs, which was more thanks to the artists rather than the writers. The last story is an excellent example of that, as the quest just sort of ends. The entirety of this backup was basically a big action scene over 8 pages, and while it ends with Knuckles getting the sword, I'm struggling to find the through line here. What exactly was the relation that all of these characters had to this quest? At least Sir Connery was a follower of the Walkers, but a lot of the links in the story chain seemed coincidental and arbitrary, especially in the fact that Po just happened to have the sword. We're never given an explanation for where he found it or anything, he just has it. Combine that with a lack of satisfying build-up in the pages of the backup stories, and the quest sort of fizzles out as a whole. The individual parts of the story are fine, for the most part, but when you take them as a whole, they lead to an ending that's less than satisfying, though it will no doubt help in resolving another of the lingering plot threads of the book. And part of that might also be due to the fact that we're approaching issue 50 and, well, we'll get to that when we get there. Next time, we're finally going to be taking a look at the beginning of Endgame with issue 47. Oh wait, psych out! We're not doing that because we've once again got another special to look at before then. And this time it's no ordinary special, it's a super special. I'll see you all next time, everyone.